last Friday of October 2014. It's Wolfgang Kirsch's short and sweet talk about referenced or indirection variables. And before he starts, Tim, you want to tell people again what's happening for this week?
Well, next week we'll be at the DevCon. I wish that every one of you could be there, but I understand that
Not too late.
Things get in the way, such as work. You have to do that, but it's not too late. Yes, you can still sign up, and we'll accept registrations up until the moment that it begins. And next week's webinar will be live from Atlanta. It'll be Jeff Graham. He'll be covering his biometrics application, and the webinar next Friday morning will be a half hour earlier than normal. It'll be at 5 a.m. Pacific time, 8 a.m. Eastern time. We're just doing it that way to fit within our normal schedule. But, all of you that's on the webinar right now that are going to be there, I'll see you next week. That's all I have, Arnold.
You're on, Wolfgang.
That sounds like a fantastic one you're letting us in on. Looking forward to that one. As you guys know, I usually end up taking topics which are aimed at for guys starting off WINDEV or trying to get going with programming. Because I think we love talking about all the fancy stuff and we tend to forget about the guys who want to start up. And that's the way I've done all my webinars so far, aiming at more the guys who want to start up and get to grips with WINDEV and all different little pieces of the programming. Today we've heard about a lot of talk about reference, well, indirection mostly, and everybody's bantering about indirection and bragging about the indirection. Indirection is a fantastic tool, but I feel many times we forget there's also reference variables. And the question was, okay, which one is which one, and let's call it the strengths and weaknesses of each, and why would you use one and over the other one? Sometimes people want to know which one is the best to use. It all depends on what you want to do. And the way to go and see which one is a better one to use is to go through a bit of examples and explain what each one does, that you get a better overall picture what each type of coding does, and then in the result hopefully which one to use for certain scenarios. So let's start, and then we go to the talking about the types of inferences you got. There's two types. Just going back, sorry, one step back. You got what we call referenced or inferenced, and then you got indirection. So let's start with referenced or inferenced. Which PCSoft tends to call it, which is basically also divided back into two different ones. The one is by assignment by copy, and the other one is by reference. The one by copy is basically when you infer a simple variable. What I mean by a simple variable is like an int or a string or something like that, and you basically say let that amount be equal whatever. Then what happens is the compiler in the background will infer the type of variable to the new variable, and that can be very happy medium to use if you are passing parameters and you don't know what the variable is. By using the let command, you automatically then infer the type of variable to the new variable. So, and that's what we call type inference or by copy. So what happens is, like example, this one is total is real, and you use a real and you put the value there, and then you say let amount, which is a new variable again, but it will automatically do in the background amount is real equals 123.98. So it copies a new variable name, and at the same time puts a value of that variable into that new variable what you just declared. or you don't have to use that. You can go straight for that. Let city example equals London, where in normal instances you would have said city is string equals London. That's another way of type declaring your variable. Let pieces of W language decide what kind of type variable it is, if it's an int or a long or string, whatever the case is. But once you've assigned it, just remember that the variable does not change during the execution once it's determined by the compiler. Then to go on, if during compilation you cannot find out what type of variable is defined, and that can happen when you have this example over here where the procedure is passed a parameter. And many times you tend to put, say, p parameters is string or is int, but other times you don't want to tell the this proc what type of variable it is, because it could be passing of a parameter which could be int and it could be sometimes a string. So to be able to manipulate in the local side over here in this procedure, then you would use a let my local be equals to that parameter. So if you're passing an int, it will then declare a local variable which is an int, and it assumes that parameter's value. And the same applies if you go and change to a string or an ANSI string or a Boolean function or decimal or whatever the case is. So that is quite nice to have the type of variable inferred or referenced into a new variable. Just remember this copy only works with simple types, basically the Boolean, the int, the real, the characters, the decimals and strings. That's what this is for. Then the other by reference is the other type of inference is what we call by reference. And that's one of my favorite ones to use, and I must be honest, I'll try and use this one before I use Indirection, because simple fact, you do this, the compiler points to the variable. It doesn't. The difference between this and indirection, it has to kind of figure out what it does before it can put the value into that variable. By inference is when you declare something. For example, this class is declared, and you want to create another. There's refer that class to another class. So you make a copy of the first class. You can then infer it, but it's not actually a copy. It references the other one. So if you guys say client, say example, there's a variable in the client class, say cClient dot account number, and you equals a variable, a value to it, say ABC company, and you look at it, cref client dot account number will have the same value. That comes quite handy if you want to reference a particular object, and you've got two objects, say example, to the line. By just changing this reference, you make your code generic. So depending what the reference client is pointing to, it will then update those variables of that class, or vice versa, the other one. And the nice neat thing about it is it doesn't have to really work out where what kind of variable it is, like in direction. It is a reference, it's a pointer to that piece of memory block. So where the memory is stored with the value of the variable, it's pointed to, so it doesn't have to calculate out first what kind of variable, then go to where the memory is. Another example is if you've got an array of strings, you can then add it in, and you say this stock list equals to reference this stock list. So if you use a stock list or reference stock list, you are talking to the same set, or same array of strings, same set of memory data information. There's no difference between the two, and it doesn't use more memory in the computer. Then the other thing, what's very handy if you use sign by reference, is when you want to check if a particular derived class or a string or an array of strings or object is really the same object as what you are referring to. For example, in this case, we got C client 1 is a client class, and then we have C client 2 is the derived class. Now when you reference one class object to another class object, you can then test it. If the reference class object is a null, we know then for certainty that the one derived class is not the same as the other one, or the ancestor of the other class. So which is also quite a nice way of doing it, to kind of test if the two classes what you're working with is actually the same in one. If it doesn't assign it, it will then nullify, well, have a null assignment to it, so you can pick it up. So if you've got some classes which you are trying to depend on that it's properly derived from the ancestor class, then you can do this test and make sure that it is definitely so. Otherwise you can do alternative coding around it to say it isn't, or alternatively pick up that as another kind of class, and you can work on that. So, which is also a nice handy trick to do. Now we come to indirect operators, or indirection. You can pick it up in the code quite easily by just looking for those curly braces, which is kind of the indicator that it is an indirect operator. And the nice thing about it, it can work on practically anything, from controls in your windows to variables to class members to table items to table fields, anything which is basically being declared with a name. So that's where indirection comes on its own, because you can kind of create that parameter or value as you go along by programming it, and it gives you immense power to kind of do computations on the fly without even knowing what the real value is in the beginning. So example, to give you an idea, if you create a variable with a string, which is a variable with a name string called name, you put it in the curly brackets like that, then you basically the same as saying name variable equals the customer name. In the background, your W language will then work it out and say, okay, this is what the variable you're referring to, which is name, and then find where it pointed in the memory and then assign that value to that. And the same, if you do the very next step, you can then do it on the source side of it, and the target can also be both sides in direction, which is very nice. So you can have name equals, in this case, cuss name, which is all in string, which is again equivalent to that. And again, we're going to do a slightly different one. We concate the string by taking the first few and then do the name onto it, and then again it's equivalent to having name equals cu.cussName, which is then assigned to the name variable. And there's another example which just gives you an idea how versatile it is. As you can see, you can, without knowing what the variable name is beforehand, kind of declare it. So it gives you kind of code which you can write generically and then find out the names by picking it up as you go. And it's also possible to use indirection in the procedure. For example, if you want to use a control name as a string, and you can pass it across. So this is kind of a simple example where in the global of your window you'll have, for example, the controller name is a string, and you pick up that the control which you want to edit, for example, the authority key on the screen edit field, you can assign it to the control name, then pass it in a procedure, for example, make invisible control name. So it will then take the edit field, which is authority key, in and pass it across to the procedure, make it visible, and use that in the indirection. And indirection also works with properties, so .state equals invisible. So this makes this procedure very, very generic, and you can be used on virtually any screen because you are passing it in a string and you are making it up by using indirection, and you can do calculations and set properties and do all kind of things, which is quite nice. Now, obviously, when you start just putting assignment across, the next thing you'll find, and think about it logically, that if you just do, say, example, let's just go back to the last one and just say control name equals state, dot state. When the compiler or the program runs, it doesn't know which variable you're referring to. So obviously it starts then running through all the variables at hand. So it will start trying to figure out, is it the control on a window, is it the item in a field, or is it the table name, or is it the global variable you're declaring. So, and that could take some time for the program to suss out and find out what kind of variable you're referring to. So there's some optimization that you can by coding. You can do some optimization in your execution of your speed. So in example, we use expression, and then we do the comma, and you can say the type. And the type could be one of these, control, or the connection, or the report, the window, etc., which helps in, while it's running the program, that it knows it shouldn't, for example, if it says it's a control in a window, then it doesn't bother looking at the links, it doesn't bother looking at the file names or items or local variables, etc. So it knows it is a control, so it will then concentrate and only look through the list of controls to find the pointer where the variable must be updated or the property set, etc. So you can cut down on the indirection, taking time to find the right variable which you're referring to. So by doing a comma type, which helps narrow down the lookup table for the running program to actually do the thing. When should I use indirection? That's always a question versus referenced variables. But indirection is so powerful that you can actually use it anywhere and everywhere nearly. And some of the examples which I can show you right here is basically you can do element of a control. You can just say there is equals to 10, and then you can vice versa again, take the control, put it back into the local variable. You can set properties by using the indirection in the first part. Obviously, if you want to speed up that, you would say comma, IND, control, which I didn't show you here, and then dot height equals 10. So that will speed up the execution. And the same here again, to handle a column of a memory table, you can go and do the same here. In this case, say comma, IND, control again, which speeds up the thing, and then your usual square brackets, which shows which row index you're running on or you want to change, equals 10, which is quite handy. And then even column names, by taking the column name and the row number, and then you can change the settings on there. And that applies to also when you're referring to data tables and its item or fields. You can change global variables. There's a whole slew. Anything which is a variable which you want to change, you can use indirection. So the question is, I think at the end, which one's going to be the better one, reference or indirection? To put in a nutshell, the way I work it is basically I go and look at it. If I can reference a variable, that means it's not a simple variable type like a boolean or int or a string. I would then reference it, because the fact is that you declare it once and it remembers as a pointer to where the memory is, and it will automatically be a lot faster than indirection. Whereas the indirection is actually what's between those curly braces, actually a string, which then the compiler or the execution program then takes, looks at the string, and then looks up what the variable is. And once it finds what the variable name is in the table, which is an example of a controls or item or field in the table, then it will then look where it must point to actually update the data. So there's quite a few more steps to be happening before the indirection actually happens. So if you can use reference because of the speed, it is very handy, because especially when you come importing a lot of variables from a table or something like that, or you're processing a lot of data information, or any other process which is doing a lot of calculations, reference variables obviously will go quicker than indirection, because indirection, it has to always find out first what variable you're referring to, and then it only can find the pointer, and then it only can update the value in it. So which is best to use? Obviously, it also depends. Some things, like example, you cannot reference, like a control in a screen, not that I know of, so indirection is the only way to go. But usually when you reference something like control on the screen, it's not a big issue, because you're not processing a lot of data repetitively, so that doesn't really matter from a speed point of view. So just the last thing I wanted to show is just 2 examples to show the how that works in real life. Now this one example which is provided by PCsoft, which I just want to show. It's a typical screen. Let's just run it, and what they have got here is a very straightforward screen with controls on it, and here you can then cut the variable out, and then you can go put it there, and as an example, and just paste it into that field there. And that's how simply used by using indirection over here, which is quite handy. And you can have a look at that. There's nothing fancy on these fields. The only thing they've got mined out is myself, which is just a way to get some data in the screen without you having to type in the beginning of the test by using the initial content. That's what that piece of code does, is pick up the initial content and initialize it. So that's what this myself node does, which is not indirection by itself. And then the indirection is happening here. So you can then say, okay, what is the current control? And this piece of code, all it does, checks on your screen and says, oh, you're busy with the edit name field, and it passes the name across of the name of the control which you're busy currently editing, and that is indicated then that there's a control, and you say dot value. If it's 0, nothing in it, obviously there's nothing to cut, so it just returns. But if there is something to cut, it then says to the clipboard, and again indirection is used, picking up the value and putting it into the clipboard. And because you're cutting it, and they then use again indirection and just tell it to clear out the field entry. And this one over here does a copy, which is very similar. If there's nothing to copy, it just leaves it alone. And this one copies and doesn't clear the entry field, the edit field. And once again, this one is pasting it, straightforward. It picks up which control you're standing at in the window, and it then pastes what's in the clipboard into that edit field. And this is nice undo functionality, in the sense that you pick up and you use indirection, then basically go back and then reinstate what the value was before. Very straightforward. Good example to go look at if you want to get a bit of grips of indirection. The last thing, and that's where I would say indirection comes in handy. I would use it there because it just works very well. But when it comes to actually getting a lot of data into it, which is my second window, which I want to show you, I like to use is in referenced variables. But just to give you an idea, what I've done is, because reference is, you cannot use, like I told you before, simple type variables. So it only comes in handy when it's an array, structures, classes, and objects, basically, which you can reference. So what I've done is I just did a sample test class, and what we did is just straightforward. What you typically would have variables and then a lot of methods in that, but I'm not going to go and create a lot of methods. I just want to show you how assignment by name is being used. So the is declared, and what I do over here, I go in here and declare the class locally, and then what we do is, my idea, just to show you the difference between the speed, is to take the start of what indirection takes, and start and times and duration, and then the same was using a reference method. So in the indirection method, what I do is, typically what people will do was using indirection is to reset the screen counter variables to time, and then pick up the start time. We're just going to do a straightforward simple loop where we run 100,000, is it 100,000? Yeah, 100,000. It's the million. I can't see the zeros here. It's 100,000. And we're going to do typically what you would do when you're importing data or processing a lot of data. So I'm going to just using indirection, so take the counter, add it to this counter in the class by using indirection, and now mess around using variables and assigning and do some chop and changing, which is typically what will happen when you do data imports and things like that. You'll have a few fields of information which you want to pull in, that you will use indirection because you don't know beforehand what those names etc. are, and so you are using indirection, which is quite nice. But in this case, we just using indirection straightforwardly, that give you an idea how it all works. And then we just take the time, and then we get an idea what the process is. Then the reference one is similar to that, but in this case we declare the class, but then what we do is we reference the class. So we then use a local variable to reference the class. As you can see from the class members, these are original class. So instead of using C class dot counter one, I'm referencing that class. So it will then pick it up, and the compiler is quite nice and happy with it. That's the other advantage of using reference. The compiler picks it up and puts the variable names and methods you're allowed to put in. Whereas when you using indirection, you have to kind of be careful of your spelling and etc. over here, because if you don't, it tends to blow up when you run it. You'll have a problem when unfortunately the compiler doesn't pick it up, so you only pick it up when you start running the program, and if this indirection is not correctly done, it will blow up on you and stop the program and tell you that it's not working because you can't find it. Whereas in reference is quite much more safer method, because the compiler will pick it up and even do auto completion for you. So I do exactly the same thing by assigning it and string slice and the same kind of thing what I would do as indirection, but I'm using a referenced. And of course I just take the start time, end time to give a good idea. Now to run this little program over here, just to give you an idea, the first one is indirection. When you click on it, it starts running and it will take you approximately 5 seconds to do this thing using indirection, and it's a very simplistic program to do 100,000 iterations, where if you do by reference, you can see the fact that it has even really picked up on the duration. But anyway, it's about 24.4 times faster by using referenced. And that's the reason why I say, if you can possible, use referenced, because it is infinitely faster, especially when you're processing a lot of data. Indirection is nice, it's a quick way of doing it, but it tends to be slow. But if you're just doing a screen or a little few referenced variables at any given time, that's not an issue. So it's very much down to your preference when it comes to a few variables you want to mess around with, if you want to refer to or indirect refer to it, then it doesn't matter which one. But when it comes to a lot of data, a lot of processing, reference is by far better. So you can imagine if the one takes a minute by reference to pull all the data in, this one will take 24 minutes, which is a lot different. There's a lot difference in time, and this is just a simple few variables what we're messing around with. So, and that's basically what I just wanted to show today, to get an idea how it all fits together. Any other questions or ideas or suggestions? Feel free to give it up.
Okay. You can either type in the chat or you can mic up. Buddy? Pretty clear about all these different things, and the reference, like you said, it's a lot more efficient. Dan has a question. Do you see it, or you want me to read it?
Indirection difference, inference, why to use them and when to use them. Real world examples.
Oh, he's just
Okay. You want real world examples, or you?
Are you summarizing, or do you want?
I get the use in theory. Yeah. Like I say, reference versus indirection doesn't really matter if you have like a window screen with your setup. Especially if you've got a window screen which has just got 50 or 100 variables, it makes no real difference. But when you're importing data or exporting data, or you're processing a month-end kind of thing, I've picked it up. It becomes renderously slow, and it makes a big difference in the way things happen. So you tend to I tend to stay away from indirection when it comes to batch processing stuff. But if it's just a single off-screen display, which is not too complicated, you get screen displays, especially web development. You can have a looper with literally hundreds of variables on each looper, and then in the looper itself you can just which quickly adds to 100,000 plus records you want to display, which in the real world, in this case, on the left will take about 5 seconds for the few what we've got. In your case, might even be longer, versus if you can do reference, then you'll find there's a big difference in the looper speed. Like I say, be very wary about the amount of variables you are doing at one given time. So, like example, one of the web sites I've got, it's got a looper, but inside each looper row, I've got about 80 different variables, which if you add up all the indirections in there, most probably 120 indirection assignments or source to targets. When you add it up and you allow a person to display 100 of those rows, 120 times 100 becomes quite a lot, and then that could convert to 5 or 10 seconds longer before your browser shows up, and that could annoy people, depending what kind of website it is. So be aware of it. There is a difference between the speed on it. But if you've got a website screen which is only 10, go ahead, use indirection. There's no problem.
Well, one of the reasons why Wolfgang wanted to talk about this, because in his own business, time is critical.
Yes. We do long processing. A lot of people say, oh, but 100,000 in 5 seconds doesn't really matter. In our world environment, when we get alarm processes coming through between 5 and 8, when the nation is locking up the shops and the other half of the nation is opening up the homes, we literally in that 3-4 hour space get close to 800,000 records coming in, and we have to be very wary about the time. When you start processing it, and if you do it normally, you could run into the minutes, and when you have a panic or a fire alarm coming through, that's not acceptable. In our industry, from the time it activates at your site, at your office building, wherever, to the control center, they don't want anything to be seen more than 5 seconds long before it shows up on the operator's terminal. So, and that's time of essence which we have to look at, and that's why I'm finicky about the differences between the two, where I think a lot of people don't really, because if you do a batch month end for normal accounting systems you're running overnight, who cares if it takes another half an hour, 3 o'clock in the morning, as opposed to that's what you would say, but for us it makes a difference.
Dan, is that good, or do you need more example, like some real examples of why you would use it, or so batch or large amounts of data for reference?
Use reference, yes.
Well, it's time sensitivity in Wolfgang's case.
Okay, fantastic. It looks like he makes sense of it. Any other thing?
Well, I
Anybody
just
wants to
love,
add?
yeah, any comments or anything? I love Wolfgang. He always brings in examples or topics that are, if you ever looked at any of his webinars, he addresses stuff that beginners or people